All right, guys, we are live. I'm a little later than usual. And I probably look super tired. But that is part of the discipline. You do it whether you want to do it or not. This camera is looking the wrong way. There we go. All right. All right, we're good to go. All right, so here we are. Um, Today we are talking about ways to fund your relocation, ways that you probably have not heard of that our clients have funded their relocation. You hear a lot about, business ownership. Not everybody is a business owner. Definitely not everybody is an entrepreneur. It's easier to be a business owner than an entrepreneur. All entrepreneurs can technically be business owners, but not all business owners are entrepreneurs, and even that's not like a strict rule, right? Because you can be an entrepreneur that's a sole proprietor and don't have a business, at all. Um, so the difference becomes the risk that you take, right? In order to be an entrepreneur, a lot of people just use it as a fancy word for business owner. That's not true. It has a definition. And in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to have an extraordinary financial risk in a business venture, right? So, for example, my very first business, I had inherited a small home, wasn't worth very much, and I ended up putting up that home to open my first business, right? So now I was in a situation where I essentially lived at the business, and if the business failed, I would be homeless, right? So that was an entrepreneur. I had an extraordinary financial risk tied up in the business venture, right? That's the definition of an entrepreneur. Now, my son, for example, will never be an entrepreneur. He will be a business owner, but he'll never be an entrepreneur. He won't have an extraordinary financial risk tied up in a business venture, right? He'll have businesses that he might like inherit, right? So, for example, the first business owner that I met that was a peer of mine did exactly that. Dad seemed like your average Joe, didn't have a whole lot of money, probably because he funneled all his money into his kids, right? And so he had a little bakery though, and the bakery was a bomb. Their pineapple upside down cake to this day, I've never had one that good. But anyway, he had this bakery, and he used it to send his kids to like Harvard and Yale and all of that. They were all lawyers and doctors, and he did the things that he felt that he needed to do to make sure his kids got the best shot at life, right? Now, he eventually died, and his eldest son inherited the bakery. His eldest son was a brain surgeon making well over $1 million a year, like, closer to the $500,000 a year mark, right? So, whether the bakery succeeded or failed, it didn't really matter to the son because the son already was a millionaire in his own right doing his own thing. So now the son owned the business, he was a business owner, but he had no extreme financial risk attached to that business venture. So he was not an entrepreneur, right? So there is a difference, okay? And so not everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur for sure, because not everybody's cut out to have that kind of risk. And then not everybody is really cut out to be a business owner either, right? However, the trappings of business ownership assist in many things, from taxes to opportunities to liabilities, so on and so forth. So, what some people do is they own their job. That has been a huge way that people finance their relocation, at least with us, has been to shift into owning their job. We used to have a division of the company that only assisted with that, right? Now, since the last Trump administration, we've just, not done that anymore, because it's not as straightforward anymore because Doge killed a lot of those opportunities, but they're still there, especially depending on what your job is. But essentially, what those clients would do is they would go to a website called sam.gov, sam.gov, right? It used to be that you had to go to, oh, what was the old one called? It used to be that you had to go to a different website first and get a number from them. And it was actually a credit reporting agency, and I don't know why I can't think of them right now. Probably because I don't deal with U.S. credit anymore. But it was a U.S. business credit agency, and you used to have to go to them first and get a DUNS number, right? So Duns and Bradstreet. You used to have to go to them and get a DUNS number. The government got rid of that, started making its own numbers, and so you don't have to go to them anymore. So you can go directly to sam.gov, right? And then you can sign up. Now, you can actually sign up as an individual, and sometimes that makes sense. One of the reasons why that makes sense is because there's organizations like the Millennium Challenge Corporation. You're going to want to write that down. The Millennium Challenge Corporation. Okay, the Millennium Challenge Corporation is a corporation. However, it's completely owned by Congress, right? This what site is down? Sam.gov is down. I find that hard to believe. It's sam.gov. Let me know if it's down again, Froggy. So, Millennium Challenge Corporation. Google that. It's a part of government because it's wholly owned by Congress, right? What when USAID is executive branch of government, right? So the president owns USAID, right? Obviously the people do, but as far as who's in charge of it, it's executive branch. So the president owns USAID, right? When Congress wants to offer aid, what does it do? Because it doesn't have control over USAID. So they created a corporation. They call it the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and they offer aid, as Congress through this corporation. Why does that matter? It matters because since it's considered a branch of government, since it's wholly owned by Congress, all of the jobs are put up for government contract on sam.gov. So those are the types of jobs that if you're registered as an individual on sam.gov, you might be able to get, right? So like we had someone who got an HR job in the country that they wanted to relocate to through Millennium Challenge Corporation, because it was listed on sam.gov, right? So those are the only, it's been few and far between that we see individual contracts on there that are not from Millennium Challenge Corporation. I'm sure they exist. I'm sure they didn't just create that category for that one, grand tour, but we rarely see any other individual grants becoming available outside of Millennium Challenge Corporation. But Millennium Challenge Corporation is technically a government job. You just own it because you're coming in as a contractor, not an employee. Okay? The other thing is, since it's owned by Congress, you can probably walk into your local congressman's office and get a whole lot of information about it. All right, I'll say it one more time. Millennium Challenge Corporation. Okay? Okay, so outside of that, there's just, your regular grantors. There's a lot of them. All right, there's the NHIF, there's the DOD, and even if you do nothing with like military and all that, DOD has contracts for everything. We've had people that were janitors, right? There was a guy who worked at a school in Philadelphia called Simon Gratz, right? He was a Simon Gratz janitor. He was done with America. He wanted to get out, didn't make a lot of money, obviously, and that's what he did. He ended up, we set him up in sam.gov. he went there. He started bidding on janitorial contracts, contracts to clean FBI office buildings, contracts to clean a bunch of DOD buildings, and all of that stuff. Hey, Linda. And so he ended up getting some of those contracts, and so he did the exact same thing he did for the Philadelphia school system, but now he owned it. So now he owned the job. He was making way, 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 way more. And then by the time he got his second, or maybe it was his third, it was a long time ago, but by the time he got a couple more contracts, what he ended up doing was subbing it out. No, he actually didn't sub out. I apologize. He didn't sub out. He actually hired people. So he turned owning a job into actually owning a business. He actually hired people, and then he went ahead and relocated because he's just the CEO of the company. He ain't got to be there, right? But the workers do, and the manager does, right? So the manager and the workers, worked the sites. He got, whatever he set up for himself as the owner of the company. Whatever profits flowed up came to him. Owners get paid last. The profits come after you pay your payroll and all that. So all your workers get paid first, then owners get paid last. And that's how he did it. Now, some people, what they'll do is they'll prime contract. So in that regard, for a very long time, you still just own a job, which is fine, right? It's okay. But what the prime contractors will do is they'll go get the contract, and then they'll go to a company that does whatever the contract is for. So if they get that janitorial contract, they'll go to a company that's a janitorial company, but maybe isn't registered in SAM. All right, Foggy, sounds good. Maybe isn't registered in SAM, so they can't, just because they don't know how to do it, you know what I mean? And so what'll end up happening is they'll subcontract that company. Still, everything is on their shoulders. They're still the contractor. But they'll have the sub do all the work, and they'll make like maybe 15%, right? And the sub will make the vast majority because the sub did all the work. So the sub will make like 85%, right? So some folks will do that instead. And again, they don't really have to be there. The only thing that those folks always have to have is they always have to have a ticket fund. So they always open up a small little bank account with a small amount of money, maybe $5,000 or something like that. And in case they have to fly back in a rush, because they are still in charge of the contract. So if anything goes wrong, they are the ones who have to show up and explain it to whoever the contract is for. We saw a contract that was, what did they have to do? What they had to do was something ridiculous. I want to say it was the FBI. And the old contracts are still there. So you can like take things I'm saying and go search Sam.gov and find the contracts yourself. But it was the FBI, and they were getting new furniture. And so this is how ridiculous sometimes the government contracting space is. In the request, for not performance, but in the request for what's it called, ROP, for request for proposal, right, which is essentially how they ask for contracts, right? So in their request for proposal, it told you exactly what kind of furniture they needed, like what color and what store, right? So they already knew what they needed. There's just some rule or some, law maybe even that they have to put it out for contract. They can't just go do it themselves. So yeah, workers get paid and the owners are last, not next. The owners get paid last. All of us owners get paid last. All of our employees get paid first. So what ends up happening with that is you essentially are bidding on the installation fee, right? So they give you the money to go buy the furniture and all of that and transport it, back to the FBI building, but then you put it together. So you're essentially just bidding on the installation fee. You can get transportation there and transportation back and all of that stuff. And because they're federal contracts, you got to get your, federal benefits and the federal holidays and all of that stuff as well. So there's some additional, it's not like just because they know the price and they know the store and all that, like if you don't bid the exact price, you lose the contract. I've seen people mess that up. If you bid the exact price, you'll lose the contract because they know you're supposed to be paying more than that. So it just has to be an honest bid. But that's how ridiculous some of these bids are. Like, you know what I mean? There's so little work in it because they've essentially done all the work for you, that it's just a pretty ridiculous bidding process. Now that does not. A lot of people take that to mean it's an easy bidding process. There's another 10,000 people bidding on the same thing. So it's neither easy nor simple. Because if you don't know the format, then there's a learning curve, which is why we used to offer it as a service because we would just write all the proposals for the clients so that they wouldn't have to go through the learning curve. Like I said, we don't do it now because of the Doge thing and USAID being cut up so bad and Sam.gov essentially being cut up so bad, but it's still there. You go there, there's still thousands of contracts on that site. You don't even have to log in to look at them. Now, you can't apply for them until you register, but you don't even have to log in to look at them. You can go look through all the contracts and see what's available right now. And it's not for the faint of heart. No, no, no. This is for people who want it. Relocating, quite frankly, Froggy, relocating is not for the faint of heart if you're not rich. Rich folks can relocate, no problem, obviously, right? But a lot of the folks who want to relocate are not rich, right? And if they were rich, maybe they wouldn't want to relocate, right? So a lot of them got to get the money together because it's not cheap. And only the people who really want it, there's a guy, he sometimes even pops in on the live, right? There's a guy who's been following us for almost 20 years, right? Pops up like we know dude by his name. He's never done business with us, right? He's never done business, period. He pops in on the lives. He's been following us for nearly 20 years. And all he does is talk. He just watches and talks. It's like a fix for him, right? He just gets off on getting the information and does nothing with it, and has been doing that for 20 years, right? And so you gotta want it. You gotta be like, this is something I'm absolutely going to do. I don't care what I have to sacrifice to do it. This is the next chapter in my life, and then do it, right? That's the only way it happens. It's the only way it happens. The talkers will never get it done. There are even influencers who talk about it, and I guess charge people to like set up plans for them to like relocate, and those people have never relocated in their life. And they have thousands of followers. So it's wild. As a former DoD employee slash contracting officer, it's imperative that you understand. Oh my God, yes, absolutely, Froggy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to understand the process. That's the biggest learning curve. But you wouldn't because you say you're former DoD, but people will be surprised by what kind of contracts exist and grants, by the way. I'm just talking about the contract side from the DoD that seem to have nothing to do with DoD, right? Like there was one called Start Talk, and we had a client who would get this start. Now that was a grant, that wasn't a contract, but Start Talk was money to create a camp. And the way you qualified for that, for the money for that camp, was you would have to have a language that the DoD was interested in. So Chinese, Farsi, I think Arabic was on the list, not Spanish, not French. It had to be a language that they were interested in. And you would create a camp where 80% of the time the school kids spoke in that language. That was it. There was no military aspect of it. There wasn't no DoD aspect of it. It was a camp that would be free to the kids if you got the grant. And you would typically align yourself with like a local college to use their facilities for a month or whatever. And you would have this language camp. And you brought in native speakers from the countries, right? So you would be able to fly in these native speakers. It was part of the grant, and it came from the DoD. It's called Start Talk. You guys can Google it, right? So that's a DoD program, and all it teaches is language, right? Now, are those students probably tracked? You know what I mean? Like if they go to Yale, does the CIA maybe tap them as a language expert in Farsi or something? I would assume so. I wouldn't be surprised since it's a DoD, grant program. But you'd be surprised like what kind of programs are available through places like DoD that seemingly have nothing to do with their mandate. Now, in this administration with Doge, do those things still exist? I don't know. I think Start Talk still exists. but I don't know if it's still a DoD program or if it's been moved to humanities or whatever. But there was a program, and it was, I think it was HHS. No, it wasn't HHS. It was the Endowment for the Arts, right? And so the it was a, was it a grant or a contract? It might have been a contract. And the purpose of it was to preserve indigenous cultures, materials or whatever. And so it was a film grant or a film contract, one of the two, right? And what you would do is you would go to the target countries and you would like film like indigenous dances and film the artifacts and film the villages. It's almost like National Geographic for the government. You would give it, and you go give it back to the government. You collect your check. So there's all these weird kind of programs that exist out there that align with skills that you don't think you know some of these grants and or contracts align with, right? So if you were a amateur filmmaker, that was literally a grant that leaned into your skill set, right? So you could bid on that grant or contract. I actually think it was a contract. Um, there were human health services grants to create family planning centers abroad, right? So you could be paid to create a family planning center, and like get nurses and build a building and go create essentially a clinic in a place that needed, family planning. And so nurses, you know what I mean, would be able to come together and put up that proposal and see if they got it, right? So definitely there was something for everyone, in there. But it's highly competitive, highly, 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 highly competitive. There is a way to present a grant program, but it's difficult because the only way to do that is there has to not be a grant program that deals with that need. So it has to be something that essentially the government hasn't thought of, right? Which good luck with that. And beyond figuring out something that the government hasn't thought of, you then have to submit it to the right department, right? So the right grant maker. So whether it's HHS or whether it's the National Endowment for the Arts or whether it's the DoD or whoever, so you got to figure that out as well. And then you got to wait to see if they accept it. But there is a path to submit a grant that is not actually on the books and see if they accept it. It's a long shot though, but definitely better than nothing. So that's how people take their job from working it into ownership. They own the job by becoming the contractor, the government contractor. We have had a few folks, all of them from New York. So I don't know if this is state specific, but we have had, no, I lie. One was from New Jersey. But we have had a few folks from New Jersey and New York that did it on the state level, right? Because again, it's your company that has the contract, not you, right? If you are the chairman of the board in that company, you do not have to be there working the contract. You hire a manager or a CEO. They hire workers, they execute the contract, and you're getting your dividends for owning the company. But we have had a few people do it on the state level over the years. But the only states that I can remember people doing that from were New York State and New Jersey State. So again, I don't know if there's some kind of state specific system. I don't know if those states just have enough money, right? Maybe California and Texas can do it too, but Rhode Island can't. I don't know. But for us, the only state contract workers that utilize the same system but on the state level were from the state of New York and the state of New Jersey. So if you're a state contract worker in another state and there's something in the state law or something that would prevent you from doing something like that, go ahead and throw that in the comments. That'd be interesting to hear. All right. So that is owning a job. It's not really a business unless you make it one. You can make it a business. You can upgrade, right? So if you start hiring people and living off the dividends, it becomes a business. But if you're prime contracting or you're doing the work yourself, then you own the job. Okay. There are other caveats like you can't run it the way you would like a startup business, right? A lot of the contracts require you to have an ADP type service to do payroll. So you have to bring on like a payroll company to do payroll for a lot of the contracts. Grants not so much, but contracts yes. Government contracting you typically have to. And I hate that they even say that because a lot of people will just go to ADP and ADP is not the best or the cheapest. In fact, it could be considered the worst for someone who's starting because they have such giant contracts. Like ADP has like, McDonald's payroll and Wendy's payroll and restaurants payroll. And I don't mean that as like a catch-all. I mean like the restaurant coverage, like restaurants, the company, like the ones that own like Olive Garden and Applebee's and like all of those, right? So they have millions of contracts already. They don't care about your little government contract thing with the two employees, right? And you'll feel that like they're not going to give you the customer service that they give McDonald's or Walmart, right? So like Gusto, Rippling, like those companies are typically better for people getting started where they'll get real customer service and they'll be treated like they matter and the blah 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 blah. But they actually say, which typically government isn't allowed to do, but they actually use ADP's name when they're explaining what they want. So a lot of people just go to ADP because they think it's a requirement, where they're saying, no, we need a payroll processor like ADP, but they're not actually forcing you to get ADP. But unfortunately, because they dropped the name, it people go there. So and they complain. Everyone, I've never ever had a client go there and not complain about them because you're nothing to them. They don't care if you cancel your account. It doesn't matter. All right. Any questions on that before I move on to the next one? Any questions on utilizing government contracting? Definitely, I would utilize contracting more than grants, but either or. Why? Because grants aren't designed to make you money. People get that twisted a lot. Grants are not designed to make you money. Grants are designed to get you to do something that the government wants you to do without breaking you, right? So grants are designed to keep you whole while you provide whatever data or whatever service the government needs. That's what government grants do, right? They keep you from losing money while you do something the government needs you to do. Okay. A government contract is designed to make you money, right? It's a business contract. You're expected to make a profit. Depending on which type of sheet, because they can tell you, look, we want you to do your proposal on this sheet, right? And so when you fill out your proposal work, hey Sarah, when you fill out your proposal work, there might actually be a line for profit. So they might say like, okay, what's the labor cost? Oh, and that's what they mean. They don't mean like the profit built into the labor. They mean the actual real cost of labor, right? And then there'll be a line that says, okay, and what's your profit? And you put, your 28% in there or whatever your profit is, So with a government contract, it's designed for you to make money. It's a business contract. With a government grant, it's designed for you to provide whatever services are needed and to keep you whole while you do it, right? So you're almost supposed to break even on a government contract, not make money, or on a government grant rather, not make money. On a government contract, it's designed for you to make money. On a grant, it's designed to almost break you even. So that's the difference, and that's why one is preferred over the other. However, when you're relocating, sometimes you're relocating to a place where money works so much differently that that slight, amount of money you make above break even is actually enough for you to get by on. So there are people who will go the grant route, especially if they're just better at grant writing. Grant writing and contract writing are two completely different styles of writing. So if they're just better at grant writing and it's easier for them to win grants than it is for them to win contracts, then they'll just stick on the grant side. You teach classes on procuring government. We don't really do that anymore. We used to have a service where we just did everything for you, right? So it was like a turnkey service. We would, if we needed to create your LLC, we would register you in SAM. We would have you find the contracts. That's one thing that you had to do. Then we would write the entire contract except for your expertise, right? So if you, I don't know, whatever your expertise was. If you were an expert plumber or something like that, and you were getting a building maintenance contract, you would have to write the parts that fit your expertise that we're not experts on, which was typically 2 or 3 paragraphs, and we would write the whole rest of the contract. But since Doge, it's not worth it for us to do that because the amount of contracts have reduced so much that it's not worth it for us to like charge somebody monthly while we get these contracts going for them. Because it used to be that if they could do 6 contract proposals within 12 months, that there was, according to, there's actually a report called the State of Grants, right? So the State of Grant Writing. According to the State of Grant Writing report, they'd have like a 86% chance of getting one of them, right? And that shown true for us. Like as long as we did 6 to 7 proposals in 12 months, which was up to you because you had to find the proposals. We didn't go looking for the proposals for you. So your job was to find the proposals, then we would write it. So if you found, 7+ proposals, those clients typically got one in their first year. Now, we don't know after Doge, we're sure that those statistics don't hold anymore. And we don't know what the new statistics are because they're not putting out new data on it under this administration. So we've just paused that service of ours until the next presidential administration comes into office, and then we see what we're working with. But it's there. We still have people that do it, and we'll just walk people through the process at this point because it's not a service that we offer anymore. So we just walk people through the process. Do you have to have a U.S. company? No, you do not. That's a great question. You do not have to have a U.S. company to get a U.S. government contract. So if you're getting a government contract as a U.S. person or a U.S. company, right, then you would go to sam.gov, you would sign up, you would use your EIN if you're using a company and your company name and your phone number and all of that. You would set all that up, and the government, while they were doing your background check, essentially, they would issue you a cage code that gets issued to you by the Defense Logistics Agency. Okay, so like the DoD would essentially issue you like a cage code, right? Which is a 5-digit code. And then your cage code and your unique identifier for SAM are the 2 codes that like get you into everything. Okay. If you are not a U.S. owned company, then you need a NATO cage. The Defense Logistics Agency cannot issue you a U.S. cage code. So then you need a NATO cage, and that's where people screw up. They don't know how to do it. It's not particularly difficult, though. They just don't know that NATO cages exist. That's essentially all there is to it. So just Google NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? NATO, 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 and then cage, CAGE. NATO cage, just Google that. And then apply with your foreign company for a NATO cage. Once you get the NATO cage, we always wait a week. So get your NATO cage, then wait a week, and then go to sam.gov. And then when it asks about the cage, you input your NATO cage. Okay, so you input your NATO cage code. It'll search your NATO cage code. That's why we wait a week. It'll search the cage code and it'll pop up the name of your company and say, "Is this you?" And then you would click on your company and say yes, and proceed with the standard application, right? So yes, you can have a foreign-owned company, and that foreign-owned company can be registered in SAM, and you can get U.S. government contracts as a foreign-owned company. We had someone that was trying to get here in Kenya via government contracting, and the contract they got was a roof repair in Kenya, right? So there was a U.S. government building somewhere, in Kenya, probably owned by the embassy. I have no idea what they did there, but they needed a roof repair and then they needed an elevator repair, and that they got the contract, right? And so they actually got a U.S. government contract in Kenya. Those exist all over the place. So you can go to sam.gov right now and go into the search and put the country name that you want, and you'll see all of the U.S. government contracts that are actually happening in that country. So definitely, you know, your foreign companies can be part of it. They just have to be registered. You just have to be registered in SAM. All right, so you just got to be registered. That is the most important step. You're welcome. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, any other questions on that before I go to the next way that our clients typically make money? That was the own your job method. Things to look up are Millennium Challenge Corporation. You want to Google Millennium Challenge Corporation, right? Those for individuals. The last person that we set up in Millennium Challenge Corporation got an HR job, $108,000 a year, just a job, like a regular job, right? So Millennium Challenge Corporation does individual contracts. What was that? Hey, from Texas, how's it going? Weather is good today, and it is 7 a.m. Thanks for liking the live. Yes, Millennium Challenge Corporation. Millennium Challenge Corporation. Look that up. All right, so looks like there are no questions on that. So I will move on to the next method that is used by our clients, and that is moonlighting. Right? People forget that you can just moonlight. So you can find a essentially a job, right? That is only active at certain times during the year. We have a lot of clients that do this, right? So, for example, we have a lot of clients that do snow removal. So they work during the winter. Now, companies that do snow removal that don't moonlight, they typically also do like landscaping during the summer, right? But we have a lot of folks that will go back to upstate New York, go back to Vermont, go back to those kind of places, Boston and all of that during the winter months and do snow removal, right? So they park their, Ford F-150 with the big, snow plow attached to the front of it. They park it in storage for most of the year. And then they go and they do snow removal, right? And so they're there for the winter. They're there for like 3 months. Typically right around Halloween is when they go back, and then they're coming back here right around February typically. Now, the reason why that really works out for us is because the tourist season here, and as you can see, this is a very kind of tropical touristy area. We live at the beach here, so the tourist season here is basically at the same time. So what they'll end up doing is we'll build them a house here. They'll come here, they'll live here all year, enjoy themselves at the beach, and then they'll go back and plow snow and they get contracts. You know what I mean? Like they're not back there, knocking on people's door. Can I plow your driveway for $20? So they get contracts and they have snow removal contracts. And they go back and they do that during the cold season. And then while they're doing that, their beach houses are being rented out to tourists during the high season. If you got like a really decent house out here, that house can go for $500 a night during tourist season. Dollars, not local, not local, currency, dollars, right? So they're making $500 a night here and they're making, whatever their contracts are allowing them to make there. We had a guy, I didn't know that Amazon named their fulfillment centers after the local airport, right? So whatever the airport code is, that's what your local Amazon is called. Now the number, who knows? But anyway, this guy used to go to an Amazon fulfillment center called ABE3. So I guess it was, I guess there's two and there's one as well. But he had a contract with Amazon that he would just plow. If it snowed, he showed up, he plowed, and they just paid him weekly whether it snowed or not. It was a great contract, right? So he would go plow, their parking lots, and ABE was like Allentown, Pennsylvania. So they had this fulfillment center up there somewhere. He would go plow their parking lots and all of that, and salt it, and the whole nine. And in the contract, it was like if the weather report said snow was coming, you had to salt. So even if the snow never came, he had to show up and do a initial salting of the parking lot because the weather report said there was a certain percentage chance of snow. So as long as it was 20% or more, you had to do an initial salting, and it was worth it for Amazon, I guess, to not be negligent and put themselves into that kind of liability, for them to just have this guy contracted like that. So that was a really good contract for him. And so you can do stuff like that. Speaking of Amazon, we got a guy who's there right now doing the Amazon thing. So Amazon actually makes all of its money for the entire year during a season that they call peak, right? And so peak is something like the day after Thanksgiving until like Valentine's Day or something like that, right? So essentially, it's Cyber Monday, all the way up until like returns. So if you got like a sweater for Christmas from Amazon, but it doesn't fit, there's like a return period as well, right? But during peak, they apparently make all their money for the entire year. The other thing they do is they own their own temp agency, right? So it was called Integrity Staffing Solutions, but it's actually owned by like a shell company of Amazon, right? So like Amazon's own temp agency. And so what the temp agency will do is they'll pay sometimes double what Amazon employees get paid. Now remember, real Amazon employees get stock and benefits and all of that. So the Amazon employees are still making out. But for peak, just for those 3 months, sometimes they'll do a pay rate to the temps of double what Amazon employees get paid, and just work them for the peak season, and then essentially they like dismiss them all. Like they don't go perm, right? So when you're a temp worker, you're temp until they take you perm, right? So the goal is to become perm, but at the end of the peak season, maybe they take 10 people. You know what I mean? They don't take very many. So this guy, he don't want to go perm. All he wants to do is work peak for double the amount of money as a regular Amazon worker. So he shows up in November, gets hired at that higher rate that the temp agency is offering. They hire him immediately because he knows what he's doing. He's experienced, so they hire him immediately. He actually ends up being a supervisor just for peak season. He's not because he has so much experience. So he goes in, he gets hired immediately. He can pick what state he wants to work for. So he typically always picks either Seattle or California because their minimum wage is like above $20 an hour. So he's so then with the temp agencies giving out even more money, he's starting at like $35 an hour, right? He goes over there, he lives in like a motel or something for the time that he's there, and he goes to work every day. He takes all the overtime. He works 12-hour days, all of that. Last season, I don't know what he's going to come back with this season, but when he comes back, he always shows me, the paycheck stubs. Last season, he made $70,000 during peak. He worked for 3 months, made $70,000, came back here, lived on the beach for the rest of the year, right? So Foggy, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. You got to want it. If you don't want it, you'll have all the excuses in the world. If you want it, you'll find a way, right? So that's what he does. That's moonlighting, right? Moonlighting means that you're working a job temporarily, essentially, right? So there's a lot of moonlighters that find industries like that where they can moonlight and do that. We've been doing this for a while. So there's an old book store that doesn't exist anymore. It was called Borders. Borders had a similar thing, right? If there is a will, there's a way. Facts. How about that? I know that's right. Borders used to be this bookstore that's gone now, and they had something that was very similar. Where when Christmas came, they would hire all of these extra people that only worked at night to like stock the books and create like the gift baskets and all of that stuff, right? We used to have people that would do that. They would only go back, and it was like the same period. It was like right after Thanksgiving, right up until like New Year's, and they would go back. They would work this, weird thing. I forget what they called it, but it was just like a special thing where you only got hired for that. UPS does the same thing, right? During Christmas, they hire people to like put the boxes in the UPS truck so that when the drivers get there, they just jump in the truck and go, right? And they hire more of them because there's all these gifts and there's more packages. Well, guess what? Happened on Black Friday. Record Black Friday with the economy the way it is in the United States and all of that. A record Black Friday, 9% increase in Black Friday sales. It was like 11 point something billion dollars. So all those things are still valid, even with the economy being the way it is in the US, even with the uncertainty being the way it is in the US. All of those things are still valid. So a lot of folks will go back during that season and make their entire money for the entire year and then come back here. And the reason why a lot of people lean into that, at least for our clients, is because this is the tourist season here, right? So that holiday season where you can get hired for, holiday moonlighting in the United States is tourist season here. So they can rent out their homes here, make a significant amount of money in just a couple months here from the tourists, and then make a significant amount of money moonlighting back home, and then they're good for the entire year, right? Some of them are good for multiple years. We definitely have people who do every other year. I had a gift wrapping business for the holiday season. I made some money. It fell off after 3 years. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, a lot of those niche companies. What I've found over the years is what makes the niche company work is to find somebody who's hungry, make them a manager and tie their salary to sales, right? So make them a manager, and you make more the more you make the company, right? And that doesn't have to necessarily translate into you necessarily making more per se, but it keeps the company stable and allows them to make more. Have your paperwork together, so there's a non-compete clause and all of that, so they'll just like steal your company, right? But even with the government contractors, what we were talking about before, a lot of folks who wanted to step away, that's what they did. They bring in a manager and they be like, look, your pay is based on a percentage of each government contract. So if you don't get more government contracts, you don't get more money. You know what I mean? You want to make six figures a year, you want to make $250,000, you can do that. Just get more contracts. And so that always worked out really, really well. Sharing the wealth tends to work out well, right? So if you're giving people the ability to control whether or not they're paid well, and you have accountable people, they got to be people who like taking accountability, right? So you got lazy people who don't like taking accountability, and all they got is excuses. It's not going to work. So you got to find people who like taking accountability, and then you give them a dream situation. You can make as much as you want to make. It's up to you. You know what I mean? And then let them go out there and do what they want to do. Yeah. It's obvious in hindsight, you know what I mean? But it took us a few years to even realize that that's what was going on. We have a referral program that works that way too. We had this kid. We just started getting like Chinese people showing up, wanting to relocate, wanting to expand their businesses here. We ended up doing a bunch of Chinese farms and all that. Like, where are these Chinese people coming from? And then we started realizing that there's a referral link attached to all of them, same referral link. And that kid used to make six figures off of referrals. Yeah. Because our average referral on home construction, I mean, it's home construction. So our average referral fee on home construction is like $13,000. So he used to send at least 10 people in a year. And so he was making like $130,000 a year. He was at Harvard Medical. He graduated, became an oral surgeon. Right now, he makes like $500,000 a year. So he's not really a referral partner anymore. But he was good. I mean, I don't know what he was doing. I don't know if he was calling family and like, help me pay for college or whatever. But he didn't run out of family for 4 years, so he was really really good. He used to send people through, and he made six figures, doing that. So there's typically ways, if you're motivated and you want to get it done. There's typically ways to do it. All right. Any questions on that? Moonlighting. All right, the next way, not as common. People make it sound super common. It's not as common, but the next way is remote work, right? So there are like coders, tech workers, all of that stuff who are already allowed to work remotely. Here's the issue though. A lot of remote jobs are geo-locked, right? So yes, there's a remote job, but you can't leave sometimes the state, because sometimes those companies, I guess, if they have presence in multiple states, are worried that they'll owe like a state income tax if you're remote working from a state where they have a presence, but where they typically don't hire people, right? And that's normally for a reason. That's normally because like they don't want to pay the income tax rate associated with that state or whatever, right? I was thinking about a transport business in the what in the country. Have any suggestions in this country? Yeah, let me know if it's this country, and I'll answer that in a minute. So that ends up being an issue where people will get like a remote job and then try to come here and then find out. Okay, I'll answer that, and then find out that like they got to be in the United States because technically, and this is what the digital nomad permit kind of solves. But technically, if you came here and you worked remotely, once you became a tax resident, right? So after you were here for 181 days, then technically, that country could kind of push the issue of like, well, wait a minute, there's some kind of tax payment that we should be getting at this point, and you should be filing here even if there's no taxable income. For us, you should start filing now, right? And so they want to avoid that. So while there are remote opportunities out there, not all of those remote opportunities actually will let you work from wherever you want. So be aware of that. All right. Now, transportation in this country, you can do that. You can do that. Um, for example, we were just in China, and there are these. I guess they're rickshaws or jeepneys, depending on where you first encountered them. But they're called tuk-tuks here. It's like a tricycle, right? It's like a tricycle with a bench, so that three people can fit on it, and it's like a taxi, right? While we were in China, we saw electric versions of that, and they had two benches, so they were better from the environment. They were a heck of a lot quieter. They were more powerful because motors are essentially all torque. Um, they had more features, like they had like Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi charging and all of that stuff. And they carried more people. So something like that, especially in this area, like I'm in a tourist area, right? So in this area, something like that could work out really, really well, where you have a bigger version of a tuk-tuk, but it has the same kind of size profile, so you can take an entire family who's here. Because what you'll see is you'll see like groups, tourist groups, and they'll be split up between like two tuk-tuks, right? Because three people, you're talking about husband, wife, one kid, that's old enough to ride on their own or whatever. So what happens if, it's the two, like the brothers and their wives and their kids going on vacation, which is something that happens quite often. Now you're waiting for multiple tuk-tuks. You're expecting them all to go to the same place. You're trying to negotiate that they all have the same charge, you know what I mean, and all of that stuff. So having a bigger one actually makes sense, and it being electric, so you're not paying for gas, also makes sense. And then having those features so that you can charge a premium also makes sense, right? So it's just a matter of finding which things make sense and which things don't. Did, did those look good and durable? Battery life? No, they look great. Yeah, they look great. The battery life, as far as the stated stats was great, and I believe you get three, so you can literally just swap them out and keep going. This is good. I want to get into government contracting for wellness in the states. Yeah, definitely something that you can do. Definitely something you can do. Again, don't be too distracted if you start dealing with it now and it looks kind of wonky. That's because of Doge. You got to wait for the next administration, and hope that you get one in there that, you know, is not insane and brings back some of the departments of government that were shut down. Because like wellness stuff, I think was under what was it? Human Health Services, which was essentially shut down. So you might get in there and not see any of that, but then, you know, hopefully next administration it all comes back. We'll see. Cost of vehicle, cost of shipping to Kenya. Well, that's it. The cost of shipping is always going to change depending on how many vehicles you got, and the cost of vehicles is always going to change depending on the economy of scale, is called. So the more you buy, the cheaper it is, of course. I think the base price for one of them was, I want to say $9,000, which is outstanding. The diesel tuk-tuks that they sell here are sold for like 2 million, which is like 20,000, right? So you're actually, you know, getting a better price than buying local in that situation. Does me having disabled veteran designator help? I was told so. Yeah, there's things called set asides. Now again, the set asides were DEI, because DEI isn't always about color. So I don't know if the set asides exist. Like I said, we shut it down when Trump came. So I don't know if the set asides still exist anymore, or if they're considered DEI and they got rid of them all. But there used to be like, you know, African American set aside or minority set aside, which really the minority set aside was just eaten up by white women. You know what I mean? Like, because there were women, so they were a minority, so it didn't really help. But they used to have these set asides. Now with the Doge and the anti DEI and the blah 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 blah, maybe those set asides don't exist anymore. So I'm not sure. You definitely want to check that. And they could be recharged. Parts and repairs. Nah, yeah, parts and repairs not an issue at all. There's a couple, not the ones we saw, not the ones with the extra seat, but there's a couple electric tuk-tuks that are like hitting the road now, and there's certain tourists that choose them on purpose. You know, so the DEI designator have been reduced and or eliminated. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, a lot of folks just thought that DEI meant you hire brown people or whatever, but this is a really good you know, example of like that really wasn't what it was for the most part. Like the veteran you know, set aside was DEI, you know, and so, you know, it sucks, but we got to get through the nonsense for now. I am being challenged. I don't know why TikTok does that. TikTok's the only one that does that weird "Are you still here?" challenge where I have to solve a puzzle. Yeah, no problem at all. Any other questions on that? And then Mumu got us into the next one, which is business ownership. So she already jumped to the next category. You can claim the designator, but it does not carry the same weight. Oh, okay. So Foggy was saying that he worked with DOD, so he must be aware of what the changes are. So he's saying it doesn't carry the same weight as before. It used to be before you only those people could get those contracts, which was really really helpful. So there was contracts that only vets could get, which was helpful. You know what I mean? Because you know, yeah, no problem, Foggy, no problem. There was also things called hub zones. I forget what hub stands for. Something urban development zone or something like that. But there were these hub zones, and there were certain contracts that you could only get if your company was based in the HUD zone or the work you were doing was in a HUD zone, right? So it was like a housing and urban development zone, I think is what it stood for. And so those zones were the zones that needed the most help. So, they would have these contracts and it would be a HUD set aside. And so you would have to be in a HUD zone, or which means that you were hiring people from that HUD zone, right? So you were hiring the people who needed to be hired the most, or you were doing the work in one of those places where people needed the most help. I think even that, you know, got doged. So, so yeah, it's a weird time. Been doing research on putting together an NGO. Oops, hold on, I just lost you. Been doing research on putting together an NGO to help train and equip Kenyan firefighters. Interesting. All right, it says one of two, so I'll wait for two. Where do you procure these contracts? Sam.gov. That's the whole point of registering for sam.gov. You can go to sam.gov right now and look at them. You can look at all the contracts, right? You don't need to be signed in and you don't need to be registered to see them. But you have to be registered on sam.gov in order to submit your proposal. Historically underutilized business zone. There we go. Thank you. Thanks again. Late in Texas bedtime. All right, take care. Any advantage to NGO versus nonprofit? Well, typically nonprofits don't exist anywhere else, right? That's like a U.S. designation, kind of a Western designation. I assume they probably have nonprofits in like the UK. Possibly they call them not for profits, like the state of New York does, right? But typically worldwide, charities use the NGO designation. There's very few international locations that I can think of where they talk about nonprofits, right? So the nonprofit is an IRS designation essentially, right? And really it's a state designation because you can open a nonprofit corporation today probably, and still have to pay taxes, right? So when someone says nonprofit, what they're really typically talking about is being under Section 501 of the IRS code or the IRC, right? So that they're tax exempt under Section 501. Now, most people will say 501c3, but that's not the only exempt section. All right, so it could be C8, it could be C10. There's an H section for a hospital. There's college section and all that stuff. So they're much more nuance on their 501 than just C3. But that's typically what people are talking about when they say nonprofit. So a lot of that has to do with how you're operating in the United States, essentially. So typically, your nonprofits are what we consider nonprofits are what the world considers NGOs for the most part. The only difference is that in some places there's like an NGO board, so you can be a for-profit company, but have a project and take that project to the NGO board and have an NGO project, right? Which you can't really do in the US. Like you can't have like a regular company and then be like, oh, well, we're doing this project and we want nonprofit status for the project, not our company, because the nonprofit status is connected to taxes in the US. So it's like, well, you're not paying special taxes for a project, you're paying taxes for the company. So the whole company would need to be 501, whatever, right? And so that's the major difference, like internationally. Does it help? Maybe. It depends on what the goals of the company, the country are. So when you ask, is there any advantage? It depends on what the goals of the country are. And if your NGO aligns with those goals, then yes, you'll be advantaged. If your NGO doesn't align with those goals and you're just doing something that you feel is good, then it won't. That's the biggest mistake that people make who are essentially trying to have a positive impact in the place they're going, which is obviously is a great idea, right? The problem they run into is that they don't consult the ground first, right? So I'll give you like a real solid example of that. There was an NGO in a place called it's not Masai Mara. They were in the name will come to me. Abu Seli. They were in Abu Seli, which is like a kind of like safari-ish area, right? So they went to Abu Seli and they started like farming, and they started farming like these drought-resistant crops and all of that stuff, and like they're going to provide all this food for the people because they were so great and they had to do this great thing for the folks, right? This has been great. Have a good morning. Signing off. All right, Froggy. Talk to you soon. Right. So they set up this farm. And then some of the workers started like complaining, like, oh, the locals won't even help us. We're doing all this work just for them, but it's okay, whatever. That's what we signed up for. And so they made this farm. And then they had like their grand opening. And again, the locals were just like, whatever. They weren't showing up to the grand opening. They weren't engaging, but because they weren't engaged with, like, no one had asked the locals anything. The day after their grand opening, there's something called the migration that happens twice a year here. Once from Tanzania to Kenya, and then the other one from Kenya to Tanzania. And the wildebeest and a bunch of other animals migrate through their migration paths and whatever. So these folks had created their farm in the migration path. And so here comes the wildebeest. They destroyed everything, like the entire farm, like wiped it out, right? And so the locals were like, had you asked us, we would have told you we don't need a farm. Had you asked us, we would have told you what we needed, and we would have worked with you, to get what it is that we needed. Had you actually come to help us instead of help your ego, and that's what happens. You might not realize sometimes that that's what you're doing, but when you haven't spoken to the ground yet, and you have a plan without speaking to anyone local that this plan is supposed to help, then it probably has nothing to do with the local people, right? So you want to speak to the people that you actually, claim that you want to help, and figure out, like, is that something like, are you going to appreciate firefighter training? Are you going to appreciate, these things? And if not, what is it that you need? Like, what do you need more than, firefighting equipment? What do you need more than, a farm or whatever? And then kind of work off of that answer, because then you're going to get a lot of local support. That's when things are going to be beneficial. It's not going to be your structure. Is this structure more beneficial than that structure? It's going to be whether the people support you or not. That's what's going to make it a very smooth transition for you. All right. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions on that? Yeah, no problem. No problem. Oh, very awesome. Very awesome, Roland. I like to hear that. Yeah, it's pretty incredible, huh? Dangerous too. Like, you get caught up in that. Woo. All right. So looks like we don't have any questions on that. So yeah, I mean, that rolled right into essentially the last way. And of course, there are all these other things that you can do. So actually, I'll say the second to last way. We'll cover one more. We'll cover a passive income way after this. But the next way is that, right? What Roland was just talking about: setting up a business, executing on that business. Of course, that business paying you, hopefully enough to get by, and going from there, and then scaling it to a place where maybe it's paying you, more than you need to get by, right? That's the goal, right? And so that requires you to have some sort of feasibility study in place, right? You can have a great idea that just doesn't have legs here. And maybe that means that here isn't the country for you. Maybe that means that you find the country where it has legs, right? Or maybe it means that you shift your idea into something that is helpful here. So some level of feasibility study is necessary to figure that out. Right? So there are kind of like easy way and hard ways, right? Easy ways are expensive. Hard ways are time consuming, right? So if you don't have money, then you might have to do historical research. You might have to take polls. You might have to make phone calls over and over and over again. And those people, you're cold calling them, so they might hang up on you over and over and over again. It might be really, really tough to do the work. If you have the money, just hire a firm to do a feasibility study, right? Find a business law firm, find a business strategy firm, one that's legitimate, get their business licenses and all that, check them out, make sure they, everything is everything, and then have them do a feasibility study for you, right? And then utilize that feasibility study. The feasibility study should be all fact, right? Your idea is all opinion. It's something, when you make it up in your mind, it's all opinion, right? So for them to flush out that idea with the surrounding facts, statistics, and would this work, would this not work, and your feasibility study can be as deep as you can afford for it to be, right? So you can do like when Coke does a feasibility study, they do actual case study groups and all of that. And they sit people down, drink A, drink B. Which one tastes the best? What did you think about when you drank it? Smell drink A. What does that make you think of when you smell that scent? Da, 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 da. So it can be as deep as you want it to be. But what you really need is you need economic data on the area. You need to know what your target market is going to be. You need to know what your addressable market is, your total market as well, and those things. So that's like your minimum level of information that you're going to need out of this feasibility study, sustainability, so on and so forth. The feasibility study is also going to tell you whether or not there are any government impediments. So if there's any laws that stand in the way, or laws that make what you're doing a gray area, or things like that, that'll also come up in the feasibility study. So that's what you want to do, on the easy side. On the hard side, I mean, it might even take you, going there and being there for a few years before you figure out, what you can and can't do. Definitely not the greatest do-it-yourself situation, right? It typically, if you're going to try to go into business, you should have some capital, and you should be in a position where you can get some kind of report or feasibility study done, with the percentage of that capital, then move forward from there. All right. The beautiful thing that makes folks able to, essentially do business here when they can't do business at home is typically the power of their currency. Might be more powerful here. Labor might be cheaper here. And there might be incentives to bring in foreign investors wherever it is that you're trying to go. So sometimes that makes it easier. The other thing is your host country's financing might have safety nets that make it easier, right? So Americans have the option of filing for bankruptcy, whether it's personal bankruptcy or corporate bankruptcy, right? So if you qualify for that, that's a great safety net where you can attempt to do your business. You can give it a fair shot, and then if it falls apart, then you can always file for bankruptcy protections, right? Where that might not exist in the country where you're trying to expand your business to. So it makes sense for a lot of people to get their financing, if they're American especially, from their home country where they do have those protections, and where they can fall back on bankruptcy if everything goes left. Any question on that? Any question on that? Hi, Sarah. All right. So it looks like we got that squared away pretty well. So I said I would give you one passive option as well. So we do have some folks that have saved up some money. Maybe they just got, some money sitting around from a settlement or something like that. So, a lot of them are retirement age and stuff like that. And what they can do is, they can ladder, right? So they can ladder securities. Typically, their initial ladder is a bond ladder, right? So what's a ladder? Bonds pay out every 6 months. Okay, bonds are among the safest investments. Now, the safer an investment, typically the lower the return on that investment. However, when you're in a developing country, that is not always true. So bonds in Kenya, and you can just look them up, Google them. Bonds in Kenya pay out better than the S&P 500, right? Bonds in Kenya can pay anywhere from 11% to 18.46%. That's the best one we've ever seen, 18.46%, right? At 18.46%, essentially every 4 years, your money doubles if you're reinvesting, right? So they're not necessarily worried about investing in the laddering here. What they're doing with the laddering is bonds will pay out their ROI, their guaranteed ROI, every 6 months, right? So what they do is they'll get a bond, for that pays out in January, which is month number one. 6 months later is June. So it pays out half in January, half in June, right? Then they'll get a bond that pays out half in February, half in July, right? Then half in March, half in August, right? So they need six of them. Okay. Typically, it costs somewhere between 75,000 and 85,000, because the amount that you get matters as well, because what you're doing is you're creating a 20-year base, because it's a 20-year bond is typically what we get. So you're creating a 20-year base where the government will cut you a check every month for 20 years that covers all your needs, right? That's laddering, right? So they'll get 1 million of the local currency or more, right, per bond bought. The million matters, okay? You'll hear people in the United States say the same thing. Oh, once you get to the 5 million, 5 million. This is 10. This is 6 million, right? It's not $5 million. It's 5 million units of currency. Okay, so you'll be above that point here with the 75 to 85,000. The units of currency here will be over 5 million, right? 6 million minimum is what you'll have, and so every month you'll get a check from the government for the next 20 years. And what you want is you want that check to cover your basic needs. So if you do nothing else, you're cool. Your internet is paid. You typically don't have a water bill. You typically don't have property taxes when we build houses for people. You can upgrade your house to solar off grid, so you might not have an electric bill. So you typically have an internet bill and like a Netflix bill or something like that. You don't have a sewage bill because we have biodigesters that we install, so on and so forth. So your basic needs are completely met by this like 100,000 payment that you're getting every month, right? So every month out of the year, you're getting this payment from the government because of these bonds. The other reason why it has to be over 1 million units is because bonds do this thing called halving. Sometimes they halve, right? So if let's say you have a 10-year bond, there can be a point at year number 5 where if you don't have a million units of currency or more, they just give you all your money back, right? So you didn't lose it. I mean, you got your money back, but halfway through, everybody who's under 1 million units just gets their money back. Everyone who's above 1 million units gets half their money back, and then they keep the other half for the duration of of the cycle of the bond, right? So if it's a 10-year bond at 5 years, everybody under 1 million just gets all their money back, and they don't participate in the bond anymore. Everybody over 1 million gets half their money back, and they get to participate in the bond until the end. So that's another reason why 1 million is the minimum level of engagement. Right now, remember, it's not $1 million. It only costs like 75,000, 80,000 to engage, and then you're set for life, right? So 75,000, $85,000, and you're set for life on guaranteed government treasuries is crazy, right? So a lot of folks who have the ability to do that definitely opt for that, right? If they're moving here. Now, you can't be on some like I'ma stay living in the United States, but have this 75,000 working in Kenya and be set for life in the United States. That ain't gonna work. You're set for life here using the local units of currency, and converting American dollars into those local units of currency, which may not be something that the American dollar can do for much longer. I don't know. You know what I mean? 10 years from now, maybe it's not as powerful as it is now. So this is definitely the time to do it, if you're going to do it at all. But yeah, super amazing. Super, super, super duper amazing. So we got folks that are 40 years old who have done this, right? So you're 40, you just set yourself up for the next 20 years, guaranteed passive income, you're good to go. So you're good till you're 60, right? And then of course, like they might sit at home for the first 2 months, but then that gets boring. Like they're out there doing things. But now, what you've done when you've removed all the stress of surviving, you can now make really cool investment decisions because it doesn't matter whether you win or not. And that's when you really win in investing, right? When you can just lose the investment and like, whatever, I get that check every month, I'll be all right. When you can do that, that's when you start making really, really good investment decisions. There's no pressure on you. You can think clearly, right? And you start looking at things with a lot more, quite frankly, with a lot more IQ, right? And that has been found by multiple studies, right? When you're struggling, your IQ actually diminishes. Your ability to think critically actually diminishes. When you stop struggling, your ability to think clearly actually increases, and your IQ actually increases, right? Or actually, you get full range and full use of the IQ that was available from the beginning. So things get better for you, right? It's a snowball effect. Things just get better for you when you don't have to struggle and think about anything like that. So there's been quite a few of our clients that within the first 2 years after this particular plan, they actually become millionaires in U.S. dollars, right? Not local millionaires because they're already local millionaires. We just did 6 million with the 75,000, to make this happen. They become U.S. dollar millionaires because now they have all the freedom in the world. All of their basic stuff is paid for, and they're making ad hoc investment decisions clear headedly, right? Looking at the facts and not the emotions because there's no emotional response to money anymore, right? They're not like, oh my God, I can fix my life if I could just do, oh man, let me just, do this thing and maybe everything will get better. No, everything's already better. We've already fixed that part. Everything's better now, right? So now the decisions are based on fact. They're not based on, dreams. And they do really, really well. So that is the passive method. Of course, you need the capital to engage with the passive method, but that's the passive method that people use to relocate. It is fire, isn't it, Miss Jasmine? It is definitely fire. It's so cool to like not have to worry about money for the rest of your life, especially when you got kids, right? And then we do our family generational wealth trusts. So they're going into the family generational wealth trust. We've even had folks, and again, you got to have the capital. I get it, but we've had folks that like took HEIs, which are home equity investments. Home equity investments are investments made by private equity on your home, right? So it's not a bank, right? HEIs don't come from the bank, but HEIs they give you a lump sum of money and you don't have to pay it back for 10 years, right? So we've had people that use HEIs, we have people that use HELOCs and all of that, and they'll set themselves up, and then they'll do the generational wealth trust for their children, and they'll do the same thing for the children's trust. So now the trust also owns that same reoccurring income, and then they let that compound, right? So there's 20 years of guaranteed money coming into the trust. At the end of the 20 years, by the way, you get your million back. You get your principal investment back at the end, of the time. So at the end, you get a lump sum back of what you put in, and that's all going into the trust and compounding. So then, by the time that's done, their children are multi-millionaires, right? And then part of the trust is you make sure that the education is set up in the trust so that the kids know how to deal with it, so that they're financially literate, so that they understand what it is to be philanthropic, right? That they give back to the community and that they're not a-holes, right? And they don't have nepotism, right? You want to, all those things need to be trained into the educational side of the trust, not just being focused on the money side of the trust. But yeah, I mean that money just grows and grows and grows and just sits there, and when it's time, they're set, right? So yeah, those things are there. They won't always be there. These are opportunities that exist because the nation is developing, right? So in developing nations, there's even something called an infrastructure bond, where when you get the infrastructure bond, the bond is tax exempt. So Those opportunities, they don't exist forever. Once the country is finished developing, they'll have the same type of bond ROI as like the U.S., which like you get a bond in the U.S., you get like maybe 6%. You know what I mean? It's super safe, but because it's safe, the ROI is garbage, right? The riskier the investment, the more the reward if you get a reward, right? But the risk is you can lose everything, right? So bonds are the safest investment class. Google that, verify it. But bonds are the safest investment class. And then when you're dealing with growing countries, you can get bonds that pay out like stocks, like blue chip stocks, right? 18.46% is crazy, right? That's every 4 years your money doubles. Every 4 years, right? So, and if you want to know how long it takes the money to double, you just divide by 72, right? So you divide the interest rate by 72, and it'll tell you how long it takes for the money to double. Okay, so that is it. I have come to the end of the secrets. So we went over what, 6 ways? 6 ways to finance your relocation. All right. The last one being the coolest, but you got to have the capital to do it. I tell you though, like I said, what a lot of people tend to do with that is they make sure that everything is set up, right? So they make sure that they build a house with us, they own their land, they don't have to pay anything, and then they get the bonds going, right? And then they're just good. Like a lot of folks, like our hire packages even have brand new cars included in them. So that brand new luxury SUV, they have a brand new home that they designed with our architect, built from the ground up. They'll own their land. Typically, it's out here by the beach, and then they'll have the bond ladder going, and it takes care of all of their base expenses, and then they start living life. So that's typically how that goes. No problem, Jasmine. Go to bed. I'm typically on around this time every day. I start normally an hour earlier than I did today. I started at 6 because I overslept. But I typically start at like 5:30 my time, which is like 10:30 ish East Coast time. So and then I go until about midnight. So you can find me at this time on either Facebook. You're actually watching on TikTok or YouTube. All right. So great seeing you. Enjoy yourself and head off to bed. All right. Any other questions on that? Any other questions on the funding? How do you fund your relocation? Are we good? We're good to go. All right, looks like we're good. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with me as always. I will be here again tomorrow around the same time, and we will get into another topic tomorrow. So come with your questions. If you think of like random questions, you can either email them to us, and somebody will definitely get back to you. You can message any of these social media platforms. Somebody will get back to you, or you can wait till the next live and just ask. All right, guys, I will see you next time.